I thought it was appropriate in one way, because I am going to talk about at least an event in Minnesota, because it was weather postponement, and we have a lot of those in Minnesota, as you know. So what I am going to talk about is an event that became nationwide and worldwide, in the end became known as the Great American Smokeout. So I need to know how many people grew up in towns under 2,500. Okay, so there's a half a dozen people that will understand maybe the setting of all of this, because it happened in Monticello, Minnesota, small town, about 2,000 people, located about an hour outside of Minneapolis. So first, introduce you to my father. This is Lynn Smith. He was a smoker. He was born in 1920, started smoking in his late teens, went in the military in World War II, and of course what happened is our government got people addicted because they were given free cigarettes. After the war, still smoking, he chose to go into the weekly newspaper business. And was still a smoker when I was born and my brother Warren was born. But in 1954 there was a pivotal event in this country, and that was the first Surgeon General's warning about the health hazards of smoking. My dad read that closely and quit smoking. He often said he chickened out early. So after about 17 years of smoking, he quit. At the same time, he then, as many people who leave something, became a bit of a crusader for this whole, for the health hazards of smoking, but also a cleaner life, indoor smoke-free environments. And he would write in his weekly newspaper column, mostly annually, about the latest developments in all those efforts and the latest health issues that were revealed about smoking. Roll that ahead to 1972. Next one, Jerry. And he wrote a full-page editorial called "The Tyranny of Smoking." It was accumulation of everything that he, at that point, knew about smoking and all of those issues. And it was widely reprinted, and he got tons of letters and acclaim for this editorial. Then he got to thinking, well, what do I do after that? He would often tell people, after you do a full page, what is there? What is there to do? And he came up on the idea independently to try to get the smokers in his town to quit smoking, and he set up the date for January 7th, 1974, 40 years ago this month. Now, some of you saw the movie Cold Turkey, so you know that Dick Van Dyke starred in a rather unmemorable movie with that type of thing. I'm not sure that there was any link in the two, but anyway, by the fall of 1973, my dad was full gear into what he called Monticello D-Day, or Monticello Don't Smoke Day. Next one, Jerry. Now, he, part of his military background, set up a sort of a military countdown beginning in the Monticello Times 4 weeks before the event. Now, the key to this was that if you were a smoker, you were asked, or hounded might be better, because smokers were found in such places as the church pews or the Rotary chairs, and asked to sign up and to pledge that I promise not to smoke on D-Day, January 1974. almost 300 people said they would do that, pledged they would do that. And what happened is that this thing sort of, it became like a community event, and there was sort of a rally that happened. And every week, you could see the list would grow on the number of people that signed up, including the mayor, including the school superintendent, including a brother-in-law of mine, all kinds of teachers, people at the nuclear plant, and it was sort of like when they saw my dad coming, they would run. But you'd catch them in places there would be no exit. In the end, as I said, 291 people signed the pledge, and meanwhile there was posters, billboards around town that if people had a sign, they sort of said participate or don't smoke on January 7th, 1974. Next, Jerry. So this was a poster that was around town that said the D-Day objective was twofold: one, to get people to quit for their own sake, and two, there was the beginnings of the movement was beginning that you and I are entitled to clean air in a public place, at a governmental meeting, in a school, at a Rotary meeting. Now, for those of one of the things I noticed just last week in all the Kennedy coverage, did you notice how many reporters and broadcasters were smoking? And it seems that if you're younger, if you're in the next generation down from me, you would look at that and think, this is really unusual, because you don't see that today. If someone lit up a cigarette in this room, he or she would be chastised, or at least it seemed to be really out of place. But it wasn't that way on January 7th, 1974 in Minnesota, or I dare say in Oregon. So if you think how far we've come. Next year. So, January 7th, 1974, a Monday. Well, what happened was that the media attention on this small-town publisher trying to get his town to smoking was a great story. It was a great story about an individual speaking out. The timing was right because there was the start of the clean indoor air, and just sort of all kinds of things that would come after that, who could buy cigarettes, and so forth. Some of you will remember Dallas Townsend, who was CBS News radio, 7 o'clock in Minnesota, who ended his broadcast talking about the Monticello D-Day. Star Tribune, Minneapolis Morning Tribune at that time, sent out a reporter to cover it. The largest radio station in Minneapolis did a remote broadcast. Picture up on top is Dad and a real well-known radio personality, Charlie Boone. CBS News sent their crew out of Chicago, and then, of course, it just became a life, and then Associated Press picked it up, and the phone rang continuously. For the first, the Rotary Club that we belong to, for the first time, had a smokeless meeting on January 7th. I think it was set up by Dad to, he knew enough about the media that Monday morning might be a good time to get publicity, but also Rotary met on Monday noon, so that hit maybe 15 Rotarians who had signed the pledge card. Well, they weren't going to do that. So it was almost like if people smoked on that day, there was almost like a guilt, or they were hiding in the shadows. And I'm not here to say that 291 people didn't smoke that signed that pledge card. We all know that's the case. But we also know of a 4-pack-a-day smoker who didn't smoke for the first time since he was a young person, this guy. So everyone knew who Eddie Schaefer was, so we just had the headline, Eddie Schaefer, Eddie made it, because he claimed that he didn't smoke on that day. And this is a really true situation. The media was the message for Monticello D-Day. The media carried this far beyond what the Monticello Times could have ever carried it. I mean, it was huge, and the phone rang forever, and it was quite a singular event in the life of both my father and the Monticello Times. Thanks, Jerry. So this was it might have been a slow lead day, because this was the lead story, the banner headline, page 1 in the Minneapolis Tribune the next morning. For most, it was too tough to puff in Monticello. So they, here it says the town was 1,700. They sent a reporter, and he went all over, but he also went into the bars. And to be sure, there were people that scoffed at this, who said that my father really didn't care so much about health of people, but rather, that he was looking for his own fame. And I mean, he would hear that for many years later. And so the Star Tribune carried this front page, and then the life continued. Next, Jerry. My father also had, of course, people thought that when they saw his license plate, of course, they thought he must have been involved in Normandy, which was slightly the case, although way in the back lines he was. But he had his own license plate. So what happened after Monticello D-Day? 100 days later, those 291 people were surveyed to see how many people quit smoking. Did this work? Was it effective? 10% had. So somewhere around 28 people had quit smoking for good because of Monticello D-Day. Those were impressive numbers. Some really caught the eye of people like the Lung Association and the American Cancer Society. And George knows about this because he actually, if I'm correct, helped promote the Smokeout in some of his days, later days of directing the Lung Association here. It was so successful that excuse me, the decision was made to carry D-Day to Minnesota D-Day in the fall of '74, 9 months later. Of course, Dad was the honorary chairman, and he went around the state and was all over the media again. And so Minnesota D-Days statewide were held both in 74 and 75. Next came California in 76, and then the American Cancer Society recoined it not as Don't Smoke Day, but as the Great American Smokeout in the fall of 77. Go ahead, Jerry. And then came also a worldwide audience, and there were no smoking days in Britain. And then ultimately, the World Health Organization has, and I'm not sure if they still do today, has what they call the World Non-Tobacco Day. You don't know if that's still going, do you, George, or not? Maybe you didn't know there was. That one didn't carry on in the States as much because you had the greatest American Smokeout. Still held today, third Thursday of November, so the Thursday before before Thanksgiving. Okay. Well, there was a ton of this whole movement carried my father to meet incredibly interesting people, including some people you wouldn't know in Minnesota, but the Minnesota Viking, Bob Lurtson, this is Tom Bernansky, a World Series hero for the Twins, Natalie Cole, who was later a chairman, and one of the most famous, Dad got a lot of mileage out of this, but Cal Welch. All these things came in, because they were also involved in supporting the Smokeout. Jerry?